Fisherman's Post. More fish, more often.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast series. This episode is titled Bluefins, Winter Giants of Oregon Inlet. It's going to be featuring Captain Jack Graham of Afishionado Sportfishing. He operates out of the world-famous Oregon Inlet Fishing Center, and we're going to be covering such areas as tackle, strategy and spread, terrain and conditions, endgame landing, and proper care. I'm your host, Gary Hurley of Fisherman's Post. Fisherman's Post has been serving the saltwater fishing community of North Carolina since 2003. We've been bringing you fishing reports, fishing schools, fishing tournaments, premium content, and here in our latest and greatest effort, the Saltwater Podcast series, where we reach out to our captain and guide friends from up and down the North Carolina coast and ask them to share with us their thoughts, their insights on how to catch more fish more often. And I'm joined in this endeavor by podcast co-host David Harden of Harden Creative Media.
Hello, Gary.
Hey, David. Welcome to the show.
What's going on?
Well, this is, your tenure with the podcast isn't as long as my tenure with the podcast.
No, that is true.
So I'm going to tell you that this is our first Bluefin guest. We have not had a Bluefin speaker for the history of the podcast, so tonight's a big night.
All right, so this is going to be brand new
material.
Right. I'm looking forward to it.
And our guest, our Captain Jack Graham, a great guest. He actually has a podcast of his own.
Is that right?
Misguided Fishing. So there's a little plug for other podcasts out there. Misguided Fishing, Jack and my buddy Donnie Davis. And so he is ready to talk, and man, he is full of information.
Cool. Well, let's get rolling. Let's thank our sponsors. We got Port City Signs and Graphics, Sabrina and the crew.
We love Sabrina.
Some good folks. They make great signs.
They make great signs for Fisherman's Post. They make, I don't know how many banners a year for me. I don't even really know, or how many leaderboard logos a year for me. They're great.
Well, let's take a look at a sign, and you can tell me whether you think it's made by Port City Signs and Graphics or not.
I understand the rules of the game.
Okay, here we go. The sign says, khakis, what people in Boston use to start their car.
All right. Well, I'm laughing, which makes it a good sign, but I don't know that is a Port City sign.
Well, let's take a look at another sign. Now we have a monument sign for Dark Horse Studios.
They do a lot of big. I know that's Port City signs. They do so many big names in this community.
They do it. It's everybody.
And that was something, again, I'm going to plug Sabrina again. And, they do boat wraps, and we talked about promoting boat wraps. And, sure, we would love for you to look at them for your boat wrap. But the other point that, Sabrina and I wanted to, came up with to get out is like, how much business to business is their business, them taking care of business. And we know that people in the fishing community, many of them are business owners or manage businesses. So that's part of what we're reaching out to in the podcast. Look at Port City signs, please.
You got it. Next up, we have yourboatmoney.com and Seacoast.
New Coast. Yeah, New Coast. It's like the commercials that wake me up when I'm zoning out to TV.
Every time.
Hey, that's Scott Bradshaw, and that is, marine financing. And as you've heard me say before, and you're going to hear me say it again, man, he's all about information. That yourboatmoney.com website, man, if you go on it, he has created it to be a host of information. But man, he is so readily available. He loves relationships. He understands that part of the game better than anyone I know in marine finance. So go to the website, reach out to Scott Bradshaw, create a relationship. You want someone in your corner when it comes to marine finance.
You got it. Next up, we have our old friends at Marine Warehouse Center.
Like a warm blanket.
They are.
My good friends.
Matt with Marine Warehouse, excited to give you guys a huge update. We're now carrying Seabourn and Spider boat line. Of course, we have the newest models of Carolina Skiff, Sailfish, Sea Chaser, and Pan Marine. With over 60 boats in stock at a Wilmington location, let's schedule a sea trial and let's get you on the water today.
So we are at the time of year, David, where I start
Yes.
thinking about my Marine Warehouse Center hit list.
Right, because it's starting to be that time of year.
Yeah, after the first of the year, I'm going to take them my boat. I take them a list and say, hey, here are the little things that went wrong over the previous year, just little things that need to be fixed. And then, of course, they do the service. You know, they check out everything. So they do that. But again, I just like to start the year with a boat that is all ready to go. And my friends at Marine Warehouse Center are great in the service arena. I mean, they do sales and parts. I'm not really buying parts. I just take it to them and have them take care of it. And they do.
Yep, same for me.
And you know what else they do?
What else do they do, Gary?
Well, one of them there they like to tell jokes.
Of course.
And while Terrell has had some good ones, I'm not so sure that this podcast at categorizes as a good one. You want to hear what he got me?
Yes, I would love to.
And this came early in the morning. I can't believe he called me early in the morning to give me this joke. But
Okay.
This is what Terrell called me. It's probably like 7:10 in the morning and said, hey, Gary, what state has the smallest beverages?
What state has the smallest beverages?
Minnesota. Minnesota.
I get it. Minnesota.
It doesn't get any funnier if I say it a second time, does it?
Say it again. It gets funnier.
Minnesota.
That's good.
Minnesota.
It's good. It's for a 7:10 joke. I think it's good. It's 7:10. You don't want to start out the bar. You don't want to set the bar too high that early in the morning.
Terrell. You know what I'm going to get him for Christmas? A better sense of humor. Tell people.
If you would like to sponsor the podcast, just contact the Fisherman's Post office and we will hook you up.
Man, and I'm here to plug membership benefits. And if you're a fan of the podcast and you want to support the podcast or get more podcasts, then if you become a premium content member at Fisherman's Post, one, you get early access to all podcast releases. So you watch all our podcasts 1 week before they're made public. But you also get bonus podcast content only available behind the paid wall, never released publicly. And so, again, that's where we continue the conversation for 10 to 15 minutes with our guest, and it's behind that paid wall premium content membership. You also get weekly fishing reports, video, audio delivery. So you get a whole lot for being a premium content member. Makes a great holiday gift.
Hint.
Makes a great holiday gift. All right, David, I'm going to bring in Jack.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to talk to Captain Jack Graham about bluefins. And when I come back, I want David's best takeaway.
Best takeaway. You got it.
Singular best takeaway. I don't want skirting by giving me a couple.
All right.
Deal?
We'll do it.
All right. Well, it is now my pleasure to welcome to the podcast, to give him the same hospitality he brought me when I was a guest on his podcast, Captain Jack Graham, Afishionado Sportfishing out of the Oregon Inlet Fishing Center. We're going to be talking about bluefins, the winter giant of Oregon Inlet. How you doing, sir?
What's up, Gary? I'm good, man. How are you?
Man, enjoying this. And again, to let you know, to reiterate, this is our first bluefin guest. I mean, we've talked about redfish a number of times. We talked about just about every species a couple times. But you, Jack, are a true first for the Fisherman's Post podcast series.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And it's kind of cool because where you're located, there is a bluefin fishery as well, but we do things completely differently up in our neck of the woods. So that'll be kind of fun to, at least you'll be touching on something even more different. And then if you ever want to get a guest from down, that way, then you can cover, a whole opposite, on a whole another end of the spectrum when it comes to catching these things. So because they're quite, the tactics change depending on the location for sure.
Well, I tell you what, we are getting a little ahead of ourselves because no one talks about any fish species until they answer the two questions.
Sorry about that.
Captain Jack, you tell me you're ready. I give you question number one.
I get excited. Go ahead.
Captain Jack, why should we listen to anything you have to say about a bluefin tuna? Anything.
The thing about a bluefin tuna is anybody can go out there and get a bite from a bluefin tuna. They are, on the days they're dumb, they are dumb. What I will tell you is how to successfully land that bluefin tuna. We're talking about fish that are, 500 to 1,000 pounds potentially out there, really big fish. So your terminal tackle, what you're rigging, the way you're rigging it, and being confident in your materials is the most important thing because they'll bite just about anything on the right day. But in order to get that fish of a lifetime really to the boat, I think that knowledge of tackle and rigging, not being afraid of of the amount of pressure you're putting on the fish is all important. And that was kind of how I cut my teeth when I started mating in the industry. Was not necessarily on giant bluefins, but it was on giant marlin, and it's a very similar way to fish, very similar tackle, very similar use of drag in order to land these things. And if you don't have your stuff right, then you're gonna get disappointed. So I mean, that's the one thing that I can tell you guys is how to successfully bring that fish boat side in a if you're planning on releasing the fish in a quick manner, and if you're planning on killing the fish in such a manner that you're not terrified and scared to death to kill the fish and bring it on board with you to take it home.
David Harden, that might be the best damn answer we've had to that question.
It was a pretty good one.
God, man, is this podcast guy good or what?
You guys fired me up.
I'm intimidated now, man.
Very good.
I'm scared to ask question. I'm not scared to ask question number 2. That was a great answer. Question number 2. And while you might think I would bring in wicked tuna, I'm not that predictable. I've got a true false for you. You got a 50% chance just by guessing. And I played off your last name, Graham. And your true false question is about graham crackers. You ready?
Wow. Yes.
True false. Graham crackers were first developed to curb sex drive.
Oh man, that's so crazy. It has to be true.
It is so crazy that it is true. They were originally more bland than we know them for s'mores. They were designed to be the most blandest food possible to curb sex drive, including masturbation. Dave, clarify that we can say masturbation on a fishing podcast.
Well, I think, you keep it scientific.
All right, we're keeping it scientific. All right. Hey, I'm going to give you one more bonus. It's another guess. The first recorded s'mores recipe, 1827 or 1927?
Oh man, I know they had they would have had marshmallows in 1827, right? I'll say 1927.
Man, this guy is good. I told you, man. He's just
every single one.
He got both questions right. He gave us the best answer for number 1. So let's go to the show. Let's go to the main event. And in our show notes, as you try to set me up, I think you're going to set us up with tackle. Is that where we're going to start this conversation?
I'm ready to start wherever you want, but I mean, I think that's, like, as I just told you, I would say that is 95% of the battle is having your stuff right. So yes, I would say that's a good place to start.
All right, I'm going to get aside, man. Start us off with the tackle for Bluefins, the giant of Oregon Inlet.
Yeah. So, it's not a cheap game to get into. We're using 130s. We pull 4 rods, but man, I always tell people you don't need 4 rods. 2 is enough. There was years where they were only biting the long stuff, so we were just fishing 2 rods. So even if you've only can afford 130, I do recommend spending the money and getting the 130. You can catch these fish on an 80 wide. I would have a 130 rod on your 80 because it's a little bit more backbone. But the 130 backed with 130 pound braid, 130 pound monofilament on top. A lot of guys use 200. I don't like the presentation that gives. I think it's a little bit much in the water. A company called Amelon makes a clear 130 pound test. And the only place I know you can get it is Melt and Tackle, and that's not a plug. That's just where you can get it, and it is rock hard and it is bad to the bone stuff. But I'll back my reels with, 130 is a big reel, so I'll back them with 800 yards, 130 pound braid. I like a Bimini to Bimini connection, so you do 2 Bimini twist loops and a triple cat's paw through. I wish I had all my stuff here to show you, but that would take us all night. But you can look all this stuff up. Some guys just like a swivel braid to mono swivel connection in between. I like a little bit smoother through the guides because these fish will take you down to the back. And then we just put about 600 feet of main line on because you've got all that braid, so you don't really need to. We put the main line on. And then scale that up to a 30 foot, 170 pound to 200 pound. 200 pounds, okay. Fluorocarbon leader. And I just use a 7692, I believe, DT, the double strength Mustad 10-0. A lot of guys have gone to a little bit smaller hook. There's some other hooks out there. Jobu's a good hook, but they do tend to break. And then when with my leader connection, and this is one thing I like to do, and not everybody does it, but I like a double clove hitch. So you want to clove hitch your leader into your swivel and your main line into your swivel. The clove hitch makes a double line, and I just like when you've got that little tiny skinny swivel and you're putting all that pressure on the fish. I like that double. That's an actual double line connection on each end of the swivel. So you want to make sure you got good roller guides on your 130 rod, but you will, if you buy a 130 rod, you'll have good roller guides on it. And then from there, my favorite bait for a giant bluefin tuna is a split billed naked ballyhoo. We get a little bit fancy. We like about a 2 or 3 ounce egg weight, a little bit bigger than you might normally use regular tuna fishing. And we actually, I don't know if I'm supposed to be telling this, but I will because I want people to catch fish. But we take a drill press and we actually drill out the center of that egg weight. And then we slide it on the main line. So what that does is that allows you to crimp your hook tight to the or your mono tight to that hook. And that kind of goes against what some guys like chafe gear. I don't mess with chafe gear. I usually just swap my leader out after every fish because you're only fishing for one most days. But pull that main line just as tight as you, or that leader just as tight as you can to the eye of that hook, and then crimp it. And then you'll snip it off. And what that allows your sinker to do is it slides right over top of your crimp, and you can place it perfectly up under the chin of your ballyhoo. A nice shot. I like copper wire, copper rigging wire. We don't mess with spikes because I feel like that compromises your leaders being stuffed up in the crimp. So rigging wire, just like you would rig a normal, like a dink bait for mahi fishing, through the eyes, behind the gills, up through the nose, around, split his bill, pull your line up through the top of his bill, and then wrap it down, break his back. Horse ballyhoo is my favorite, horse ballyhoo or select ballyhoo. And what we do is we measure out our lines, and I have my mate mark his lines. Each one has a 600-foot mark on it. Some guys like 5, I like 6. Some days it doesn't matter, some days it does. But a 600-foot mark on all 4 of your rods or both of your rods. And so you'll want to run 2 long riggers, 600 feet back, and then regular short. I run just straight up short riggers where I can actually see them, because when the fish are hungry and they're biting the short riggers, it's a lot cooler because it looks like a depth charge going off in the water. But tight clips, you can get fancy. We usually just pull ballyhoos, but I've experimented with some years the fish are feeding on bluefish, and my Australia marlin fishing experience, I like to rig baits, needle and thread, and I'll sew up bluefish to swim and have them swimming down deep on a short rigger, and I've been successful with those. Seems like the sharks eat them a little bit worse. There's guys that are stitching up mullets and using mullets as well. They'll eat just about all of it, but I've obviously caught the most on my ballyhoos, just because that's, they're readily available, they're easy to get. We don't really mess with live bait up here. I feel like it would work, but a lot of days we're catching these fish right on the Gulf Stream change, and that time of year the Gulf Stream change is loaded with hammerhead sharks. So some days, even I talked about the bluefish, I can't even fish a bluefish because the hammerheads will attack it. So live bait, you're just going to get eat up by sharks most of the day, and that's one of the reasons we stay away from them. And then obviously outrigger clips, tight. I like a real super tight clip. I like to see my outrigger almost just, you think it's almost going to break, and then payal, that really will drive the hook home in the bluefin. And then we do a bit of nighttime stuff, Boston mackerel, squid, stuff like that, and we'll stay out at night and we'll drop them down. We kind of look at where the marks are as far as where the fish are in the water column. We'll pull off that much line, put a mark and a sinker about, I don't know, 50, 100 feet up from the bait, and just kind of drop and drift. And it's boring and cheesy, and I usually really hope that I've caught one before it gets dark so I don't have to stay out there all night. but straightforward. And then you can put skirts. You know, the Joe Shoots deals are really popular. The heavy head stuff, all different colors work. I've had a lot of color. Luck with pink. I've had a lot of luck with green and crystal, blue and whites. Kind of something different every year. A lot of guys are using the Ron Z now, the little just the little worm tail that you buy right at the tackle shop. So if you're in a pinch and you can't get ballyhoos, don't be afraid to whip those Ron Z's out of your tackle box and throw one of them back their ways. I do like to say I'll run them up the hook, and then I'll take a small zip tie. It doesn't have to be that small because you'll put a skirt over that, but I'll take a small zip tie and cinch that down. So if a fish does grab it, he doesn't pull it down. And if he misses it, sometimes, you might get a second opportunity out of him. Whereas with a ballyhoo, you don't normally, because they bite it one time, they foul up the bait, and then they don't come back. So that's kind of a one-time deal. So the Ron Z can be an effective thing. Sometimes we'll pull one on one, one of those and one of the other, and just see what's working out best. But terminal tackle is so important, just because, like I talked about with drag, with the 130s, you can really whip them. And we scale our drags 30 pounds on strike, and that gives you 65 or so, I believe, up at the top at sunset. And I always tell people, do not, a lot of times people, and myself included, you hook that one fish and you really want to catch him, and you kind of baby him, and you take it easy and you take it easy, and then, but the longer you fight a fish, in my experience, the better chance you have to losing that hook, and all that pressure starts wearing in his mouth, and to wear a hole out. So I always tell people, if your stuff is rigged right, and it's rigged like I've told you today, everything's pulled tight to your swivel, everything's pulled tight to your hooks, your knots are good on your bimini to bimini or your swivel, you cannot break that stuff. If you've got the right rod, that line is not going to break. I have tried and tried and tried. I like to sometimes I get in the chair with them once or twice a year, and I do everything I can to break those things off, because about an hour into the fight, I'm just over it. And I'm like, why did I do this to myself? And I have not yet been able to break that line. So that's the biggest thing I preach to people, is let that fish take his first big run and give him the heat, because he will respond to it, and he will respond in a positive manner. And especially these really great big ones, you'll have that fish a lot quicker than you think you should. I mean, a 700-pound fish with the right amount of drag should not take you over 2 hours to catch.
All right, man. So before I start asking some questions, I'm going to let you know that I am probably I'm more comfortable in the arena of talking with Donnie Davis about trout over grass beds than bluefin. So I followed most of what you said, but I didn't follow all of what you said. But the stuff I didn't follow, I know people who are going to put this into practice did. I mean, I know you were loaded with information, but for my brain that works a little bit slower, I'm just going to ask a couple of follow-ups. All right.
Sure.
So when if you're doing a 4-line spread and too far, too closer, are all of them on top, or are you playing with any depth?
We used to mess with a planer a lot, and some guys still do. I would not tell you not to. The one thing I would recommend is when we're regular tuna fishing, or we're fishing for wahoo, a lot of times you'll have that breakaway planer. I don't think that you wind up with a big bridle and a lot more connections and crimps, a lot more opportunity for failure. What I tell guys is take a downrigger, put you a number 24 planer on a downrigger, and you say you're marking them at 120 feet. Put that thing down there 120 feet. It won't go 120 feet, but those fish can see you up there. The eyesight on those critters is amazing. And then just either I'll attach a release clip and then a rubber band to your line, and I like to wrap it around about 10 times, and then take the loop from one end and the loop from the other, put them together, and either put it in your clip, or you can just put it on a swivel on a double snap on the end of the planer, and drop it down there. And that does sometimes get a bite. I have been a long time messing with it, but we definitely used to utilize that quite a bit. So I mean, it's a good thing to have at the ready and have in your arsenal for sure.
All right. Another question I had, you mentioned a couple times that you like really tight rigger clips, and I'm always curious about the why.
So when the fish bites the rigger, if the clip's loose, he's gonna like bill fishing, we rig our clips to be real loose, just so that the fish can get his head turned, because we're circle hook fishing and we want the drag to come tight, and that circle hook's supposed to be down his hatch and coming out, but with and the circle hook finding its home. Now with a bluefin, with any kind of tuna, you're getting a reaction strike, whereas unlike a bluefish who eases up behind the bait most of the time, that bluefin is coming up and he is inhaling your bait. So he's turning his head really quickly. So you're relying not on your drag on your rod, but you're relying on that release. Well, a combination of the two, because you have to have your drag tight enough so the fish doesn't pull drag out of the reel when he's popping the clip out, but you're relying on that release clip, and everything's going to come tight at one time, which is as he's turning his head, it's going to find that J, because it's a J hook. That J hook is going to find its home, and the release clip, the tautness of it with the momentum of a forward boat is going to drive that hook into the corner of his jaw before he can get down. He can pop that clip out and get a little slack in the line and go, oh, I was not supposed to eat that, and spit it back out.
All right, man, I love that explanation. What about this question, man? If you're going out and you're going to fish 4 lines or you're going to fish 2 lines, like how many extra baits, I guess, do you pre-rig or do you have on the boat?
I would have at least a dozen horse ballyhoos, at least, and then like I was talking about the Ronzis, and then have you some Ronzis set aside. I mean, we have a freezer on board, and it's always slam full, so we don't normally worry about it. And it also depends on how good your bait is, this and that. But if you've got a dozen nice horse ballyhoos and a 2-rod spread, that's probably going to last you all day, unless the yellowfins start eating you up, which is a good problem to have. And you'll catch some yellowfins, and then you'll throw your Ronzi out, and you'll catch a big bluefin, and you'll be like, wow, I didn't even need those stupid ballyhoo.
All right, man. I think those are the at least the main questions I had from your initial, terminal tackle discussion. And you went into spreads technique a little bit, but what about the terrain? Like I know we had that in our talking points. So if I'm heading out of Oregon Inlet, if I'm with you heading out of Oregon Inlet, what are you looking for?
A lot of times it's Gulf Stream change oriented. So you're traveling through cold water, cold water, cold water, cold water, cold water, and then all of a sudden, bam, you hit the edge. We're usually fishing around a place called the Point, but we use the satellite shot a lot to see where the Gulf Stream is. If you get a hard north blow, a lot of times that tends to push the Gulf Stream further out to sea, so you might have to hold down to the south a little bit. I tell you though, Gary, sometimes they'll surprise you. I mean, we had some fishing last year in some cooler water in 80 to 90 to 100 feet of water, similar to what you guys was still catching them on ballyhoos, but stuff that that you wouldn't necessarily places you wouldn't think to look. That's the thing about a bluefin, is they're a cold water as well as a warm water fish, and I think one of the reasons we tend to favor the Gulf Stream and the Gulf Stream edge is that gives us a piece of quote unquote structure to fish around, and just something that we feel like is going to concentrate the fish. But those things, I mean, we find croakers in their bellies, we find fatback, we find ribbon fish, we find menhaden, we find sargasso grass sometimes, and the best I can think is they're just coming up on that Gulf Stream change with the sargasso edged up, and there's all these all the little fish, and they're just coming up and rolling and eating that. One of the wisest captains from Oregon Inlet always told me, Capt Tillett, who was the founder of Modern Sport Fishing, always told us to always go with the fleet. And sometimes that is not necessarily the right call, but in bluefin season, when there's really one fish, you're not really looking for pieces of water. You're not chasing a mahi somewhere where a bunch of boats might be, because they're all going tuna fishing. So it's a really good idea, I think, to kind of have boats around you. And the other nice thing about bluefin season is at Oregon Inlet, we're on channel 80 at all times, and the commercial boats are out there, and we're all fishing for one fish. We get our one fish, we get to go home and sell it. So the quicker we get it done, the quicker we get to go home and take a nap. And it's a tiring time of year. So I always tell people, leave with the fleet, watch where they go. You don't have to go to the same place because a lot of people like to, well, we found them here and we found them there, but go out there and have your radio on and listen to what these guys are saying. We use Loran numbers, TDs, Loran. We don't use lat long. I don't know why, but we don't. So make sure you got your GPS figured on that and kind of just, look at where the guys are going. I like to split the difference a lot of times. There's a lot of boats going here, a lot of boats going there. I'll kind of go in the middle, or a lot of boats going down here. I might hold the north edge. Um, but that's the nice thing about bluefin season is more so than any other time of year. Everybody is accommodating. Everybody is helpful. I can't stress enough. Make sure your radio works. Keep it on. Listen to what we're catching, but also, it's wintertime. So if you get in trouble, your radio's working and you can call us, or if we're in trouble, we can call you. Or, a lot of times, when a bite gets on, there's a lot of boats packed tight, and, we can call each other and, tell somebody to turn off so they don't run over your fish and everything like that. But that is the best way to know where to go, because I will say that if I tell you one thing, this season will be the complete opposite. I mean, there is never an X marks the spot, but it is generally from the 630, which is a TD line, down to the point, and then to the south of that down to Hatteras is where we usually find most of our fish that time of year.
Man, as far as the theory, or maybe there's not a theory, maybe there's just a straight up answer for being with the fleet. Is it just more bait in the water? It just brings more attention, and it might even bring them in or motivate them to be more active because there's more commotion?
I think maybe when they go to biting, yes. Just like you see like a school of redfish, when you cast that popper into them, and a lot of times if you make that first one bite, then the rest of them will bite. And we see that with fish a lot too. I mean, it's like a jealousy thing, or it's a, eat or be eaten kind of deal. So I would say sometimes yes. And then, but I would also say that, when you go with when you're, and I mean, we spread out pretty good, but, I liken it to mowing the lawn. We're trolling, and the fish are they're hardly ever in the same spot 2 days in a row. It might only be a 1 mile difference, a 2 mile difference, but if you're 1 mile inside of that, then you're not going to find them. Sometimes I shudder to think of how many days I have been so close to those fish and not found them. You know what I mean? Because I know that there's been boats that have come behind me, and they've been a mile outside of me, a mile inshore of me, and they've got a bite, and I haven't. Or the opposite. I went fishing. I went off on my own and looked around. So you go with the fleet kind of to the general area because they've been out there every day, and they kind of feel like they might have an idea where they are. And then I like to look around and say, well, he's here, he's here, he's here. I'll go here, and then so you kind of you go that way, I'll go this way, kind of mentality.
All right. Now this question, man, I think you're going to have an answer to the first one, but I'm going to guess the answer to the second one is anything could happen on any given day, or apply on any given day. So the first one is, roughly trolling speed, like what do you set it at? And then two would be, man, how do you guys work it out there? Are you traveling usually up and down the current? Is it usually one side of the current or one side on any given day could be better than another? Are you figure eight? Are you circles? Like, is there any rhyme or reason?
It's kind of straight line. I mean, I'm a zigzag guy, and everybody's different. But I'll start out. Let's say I'll set out in 100 fathoms, and because they're not always on the edge. Sometimes they're out in the middle of the Gulf Stream in the screaming current. And so I'll angle my way out into deeper water. Then I'll come back in on this contour line. Then I'll go back out. There's other days where the current is running so hard up the beach that you just got to that everybody just puts their nose into it, and somebody's here, 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 and here, and you all just sweep down with the current. I mean, sometimes some days you're only making 2 knots. I would say, but that's just because of the current. I would say trolling for bluefins, I like a little bit slower speed. 6 knots, between 6 and 7.5, and anywhere in there. I'm like a 6.8 kind of guy, 6.8, 7.2. I've always felt good. And one thing I'll tell people is don't be afraid to slow down. Especially if you start to mark them, like if you start to get them on your machine and you don't get a bite and this and that. I like to do kind of a get over them and then kind of turn. And a lot of times I'll slow my boat right down to just a creep and let those baits sink down. come out of my turn and kind of put the boat back in gear. And it's almost like you drop those baits down closer to them. And then it's, just like anything, then those baits come speeding off out of them. And a lot of times the fish can't, they can't resist but to bite, something that's being taken away from them, just like throwing a popper, like throwing a jig, a lot of times if you slow it down, they'll stop. But if you speed it up, they'll react to that too and come out at them. So, a lot of it's messing with them. And then sometimes we say, hey, diddle diddle right down the middle, and you plow right through those guys and 4 of them go off and you feel like a genius. And really they just were hungry.
All right, man. So I've enjoyed this. So I think this is a good time to segue into we're doing it right, and we get a bite. So let's approach it this way, man. I'm on the aficionado. I'm the first one to get the rod, get in the chair. So we get a bite. What does the captain do? What does the mate do? And what are you telling me to do?
I'm going to keep the boat in gear for quite a while. And that's just that keeps driving that hook home. The other thing is I'm greedy. I like to hook more than one. So if I'm over a big mark of bluefin tuna and we hook one, well, I know I've got enough line on my reel. I know he's not going to spool me. So I'm just going to let her ride. And I'm going to, the other thing that's going to happen is everyone's going to stay very calm. We're not going to panic. We're going to say, man, that's cool. We got a really big fish over there. And once we figure out, okay, that's going to be our only bite, the other guys in the group are going to go calmly, coolly, collectively over to the other 2 or 3 rods that are in the water, and they're going to crank those rods in. So we're going to get all our lines in, and then, only then, is the man in the chair going to receive the rod. He's going to strap himself into his harness, and I'm going to pull the boat out of gear, and we're going to start catching that fish. I don't like to fight tuna in reverse. Occasionally, if a fish gets foul hooked or wrapped up and he takes a lot of line, I will bump her back a little bit just to collect some more line on the spool. But they're going to take a big run, and do not, if you put enough line on those fish will not spool you. People get so worried about that. They will not spool you. Don't scream, don't holler. Keep your drag at strike at 30 pounds. And when that fish stops, just start slowly cranking some line in. That time of year, a lot of times it's rough. I like to fight the fish. We always talk about fighting them head to. So I'll put my nose into the sea and fight the fish head to, because if you're fighting a fish and you're going down sea, then those waves will be pushing you away from the fish you're fighting. And what that's going to do is that's just going to, as your boat gets a hard shove, that's going to be pulling line out of your spool that you're going to have to crank back. So it's always good to keep the boat head to. I can't stress calm, coolly, and collectively enough, Gary, because I've just seen it too many times, and I was guilty of it one time. But people start screaming and hollering, and you see it on Wicked Tuna all the time, and everybody panics. And man, that's how you lose big fish, is you freak out. You get that bite and just pretend it's the 50th redfish you've caught out of that school that day. You're tired of it. You've had enough. You're just playing with them at this point. So you are better than that fish. And I hate to sound, I'm sounding like the fishing psychiatrist right now, but just, stay calm, make sure your drag's where it needs to be. What I like to do is I like to stay at strike until I get my main line back on, until all my backing's back on the reel, and I got a couple wraps of the main line back on, and that's when I like to start easing that drag up. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy when I've got the top shot back on the reel. So I get that top shot back on, then that's when I start really doing battle and trying to hurt him with the drag.
Man, so I know there's nothing typical, but I'm going to ask anyway. So the typical run, man, is that fish going offshore? Is it fish going down? And, what are we talking about? Like 500-yard run?
Yeah, I would say, a 700-800 pounder, he could run out there, 300, 400, 500 yards for sure, especially if he bites one, a 600-foot bait that's already back there, what's 600 feet, 200 yards, right? So if you got a bait that's already back there, then sure, he's gonna go a long ways. But and typically a lot of times, especially when you're out in that heavy Gulf Stream current, those fish will just kind of lay up in the current and they'll use that current to their advantage. But I like to try and use the current to my advantage where I hold my boat if I can, if I can hold it head to into the current, I will, because then not only is the fish fighting your boat, but he's also having to fight the current. So you've got two things working against you, and it'll seem like kind of tough at first, but eventually he'll start being like, oh crap, this is 5 knots of Gulf Stream current and a 25,000 pound boat that I'm sitting here trying to battle. And a lot of times, you'll get him in quicker than you think.
All right. So I'm in the chair and I'm good at listening to an instruction. So I'm staying calm. And we are now looking at, the fish coming boat side. Then what can I expect?
It depends. The seasons are such that a lot of times we only get to keep one giant recreationally a year. We get one school size fish under 72 inches a day. And if it's that size of fish, that tackle's a bit overkill. We have to have overkill tackle because we're fishing for giants, and that's what mostly lives out there. So that short fish, we'll ease him up. The mate will tell you to stop. He'll take a couple wraps. He'll gaff the fish. He'll grab a couple guys, throw another gaff or two in him, pull him over the boat, and you get to take that one home for dinner. With a giant, just depending, we like to pull them up boat side for our customers to see, and the mate enjoys that too. The mate's job is the wireman, and so I make sure mine's got good gloves. So that would be a terminal tackle thing that I missed. A good pair. Of padded gloves. You can get them at the tackle shop. You don't have to go crazy. I mean, they make leather marlin gloves and everything like that, but I run a pair of pelagic gloves. They're padded ones, and they're built for billfish, but they work great. Just something, and we'll wire him up there and ease him up, and get him boat side so he's swimming along the boat. We'll get some pictures, get the anglers out of the chair, cut the leader off as close to the hook as we can. Rarely do we get our hook back, and watch him swim away. One thing I will touch on when you're wiring a fish, and I see this a lot, even with experienced wiremen these days on social media. I have to say to kind of keep quiet sometimes from commenting, but when you're taking wraps and your hands are like this, okay, so I liken it to reading a newspaper, and the line's going to come in here, and you're going to wrap out and out. Always, always, always take no less than 2 wraps. You can take 3 wraps. Never take just one. And that is how people get hurt. You take 1 wrap, and you take 1 wrap with this hand and this hand, and you've got a wrap in each hand. Well, when you only take 1 wrap, that line does not get in a bind, and it can slide. So if you're hanging on to a real great big fish and he takes off, he can slide your 2 hands together, and then you're handcuffed and you can't do anything about it. So really keep that in mind when you've got that 1 wrap and you feel like it's a lot of times it's easier to get one more with this hand. Keep that in mind. Get your 2 wraps. Even if you hang on to your 1 wrap for as long as you can, and then reach down and get another one. But always take 2 to 3 wraps. 2 wraps is kind of just textbook, but I will say for safety purposes, always take 2 wraps.
All right, man. And so when we're talking in your show notes about proper care, is that when we put a wreck fish in the boat? Is that your vision?
We will care for both the same. And well, I will say this, that I leave it up to my customer. I like to care for the fish in a commercial style way. If it's a recreational fish or if it's a non-recreational fish. However, I do understand that there's a marlin boom back in my fishing center, and social media is a big thing, and my advertising is a big thing. So I do understand that people don't necessarily want to cut the head off and take the guts out of their fish out at sea. They want to hoist that thing up on the boom and get a picture of them looking like a little tiny person standing by a fish. So a lot of times I'll leave that up to my group. But if you're going out there to catch the fish to eat it, I strongly recommend bringing lots of ice, couple sharp knives. My number 1 tool is a battery powered sawzall. And you can have a metal, it doesn't matter what blade you're going to cut through the fish, but you can lop his head off and take his gills out with that battery powered sawzall, so much quicker than making the fancy cuts that they make over in Japan that I still haven't figured out how to do. And somebody who watches this podcast that knows will make fun of me, but hey, whatever. I got a DeWalt sawzall, and that lops his head right off. And then you'll cut down in his butthole. You'll cut a little hole down there, and you can pop that stuff out. It's like a piece of intestine or whatever. And you want to pop that, and then all the guts should come out, and then you want to pack that thing full of ice. I'll bring we get special paper to cover them up so they look real pretty for the buyer. But if nothing else, just a towel, something like that, a big towel, a blanket, anything like that. Wet it down real good, and ice him up. And I should preface this. I'm sorry, I'm getting too far ahead. But what we'll also when we get the fish on the gaff, we'll throw a dart. We'll dart the fish when he gets boat side. If we're going to kill him, we'll get a tail rope on him. We'll cleat him off, and we'll drag him. And if I'm close enough, I'm not always close enough. Sometimes the Gulf Stream pulls you out too far. But if I'm close enough, I will idle into the colder water, because a lot of times if you're right next to that change, that 48 to 50 degree water isn't that far away, and that cools them down really a lot quicker than anything. So I'll idle them into that water, and I'll let my mate, we'll clean everything up. We've got fresh water on board, so we'll wash the rods, we'll wash the cockpit, we'll do everything that needs to be done. We might even have a bite to eat, and catch our breath, have a cup of coffee, and on autopilot heading for the barn before we pull that fish on board, and then start doing the head chopping and the gutting and everything like that, because that cool water really seems to do better at cooling them down than anything.
So the true purpose of pulling them backwards is just to cool them down, to get them so they're not going to tear up the boat when you bring it in? Or I guess I just want to make sure I understand.
Well, what you'll take and I don't know if there's more to it than even I keep thinking. But we'll pull him boat side on the gaff, and we'll take either a knife or just the back side of your dart or anything, and put it right there back behind his gill plates, and we'll bleed him. So give it a good cut. If you can get both sides, a lot of times you can't, but get him a good cut, and then tail rope him. And what that does is that water will help pull all the blood out of the fish, so you'll give him a real good bleeding, and that's a big thing, especially for buyers. They like to see very little blood in their fish when you bring them in. I've heard it keeps longer, all that kind of stuff. I don't eat tuna, but people love tuna. And that's what the tuna people tell me that you're supposed to do. So we always do that. Some of the guys will actually swim them. They'll put a what's called a swim hook in it, and you can get that. It's like a giant hook with a latch attached to it, like a big barb, and they'll put that through his bottom jaw and cleat him off, and they'll swim that thing for an hour or two till he's bleeding out, but he's also coming back to life. I haven't really figured it out, because they'll cut him to bleed him, but he's paddling along back there. I don't know, but there's guys that are into that. I haven't seen any difference price-wise for what kind of money I'm getting from the guys that swim versus the guys that don't. Where I do see money price-wise is from the guys that really ice them well and don't leave them out in the sunshine. And, the buyers that we use are really dialed into tuna quality. So I will tell you that the best prices we get are for our best cared for fish. So it is, even if you're going to just eat it for yourself and give it away to your friends, I think you're taking a pretty magnificent animal. So it's definitely worth it to take proper care of it, rather than letting it go to waste.
Man, I think we're at the end of this podcast. Again, we're going to do a bonus podcast content, but I think we're at the end. I got a couple of questions. I mean, one, though, would just be like, just the gentleman. Anything else you're thinking of that maybe you want to relay to the guys before we transition out?
The one, like I said, with the wraps, the one thing I preach out of Oregon Inlet is safety. We get big swells on the bar. I turn around a lot. I'm not into crossing the bar on a big giant swell and a hard ebb tide with it breaking all the way across. So I just, I always tell people to be careful out there. Keep channel 80 on, relay your information, talk to the captains. We'll tell you what's going on, or just have an ear open, because like I said, usually the best way to get information, if you didn't land in the fish, a lot of times other guys didn't either. So don't feel bad about that. I get called to a bite all the time. Other guys, we all get. Nobody's the one guy that finds them every day. That man does not exist on this planet that I have seen, and I've fished all around the world. There's a lot of really good ones, but keep that radio on. Most of the time, we'll say we're hooked up, and we usually put in the exact coordinates, exact location of where we had our bite, so the rest of the commercial fleet knows, because we're all fishing for one fish. So we're trying to help everybody out. We want everybody to get a fish. So keep that channel 80 on, keep a listen out. And a lot of times if the fishing starts to get good, or you'll know if the fishing sucks, and maybe you can wander off and go somewhere else. And maybe you can be the guy that puts it on the radio. And please, if you are that guy, put it on the radio and let us know, because we appreciate it as well. So it's definitely a team effort in the wintertime. And we like everybody to stay safe. It's cold, it's nasty. We push it a little harder than we probably should sometimes, but definitely I tell people always to err on the side of caution on a bad forecast or something like that. But anyway, that would be what I would preach about that fishery.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up by going back to, aficionado and chartering. So the standard bluefin charter out of Oregon Inlet, on aficionado, I pay a fee. It's up to 6 people, and we might get lucky enough to bring a wreck fish home.
That's correct. And I will use my giant tag. I get one giant tag a year. So especially if the season's about to end, which we never know when that's going to be, it all depends on the quota. And a lot of times the quota depends on the weather, sometimes the quota goes into mid-February because the weather's been bad. Sometimes it goes into early, the end of January, early February. Yes, I will. A wreck fish is number one on our list. A lot of times there's yellowfins around, and then I'm a big heavy drag junkie. Like I said, I love the tackle. I love the big 130 reel. I love putting people in the chair, and if you haven't caught one before, the look on people's face when they see that, my mind's still blown by those things. They don't even look real. They look like something like a cartoon or something like that. They're just, it's amazing that Mother Nature's created such a specimen when you get one of those 600-700 pound fish up close boat side.
Most of the guys you put in the chair, do they see the fish to the boat, or is there ever a handoff? I mean, you talk about strapping them in, so that seems problematic.
I do my best. I like to teach heavy tackle fishing. I really do, because it's all technique. The black, I was in Australia when a girl named Steph Choate set the ladies 50-pound class world record on a black marlin. And it was, I can't remember how big it was, 1,100 pounds. It was over 1,100 pounds on 50-pound. And this girl is about 95 pounds, 100 pounds soaking wet. And she whipped that fish's butt. It is all about technique. And if I can teach you the technique, you should not you'll get beat up and you'll get tired. But if you can understand the times to rest and the times to reel, then you should be able to see that fish to a boat. So I really try and emphasize staying with it, because most of the time when people do, they thank me when it's over. They say, they were happy that they were able to see that fish in, rather than giving it to their buddy on the last 100 feet. And the fish gives up and he cranks him right in, and hey, look what I caught, so I definitely try and get people to see it through.
All right, Captain Jack Graham, that brings us to our end, man. Thank you so much. That was info-packed, action-packed, and you got me pumped up.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.
All right, we're going to check in with you in a minute for bonus podcast, but right now, Dave and I are going to wrap this up.
All right, I'll be here.
Thanks, man. David Harden.
Hey, Gary.
I'm going to change the rules of the game.
Okay.
Instead of David's best takeaway, I just want you to repeat to me the knots he uses and how he sets up his terminal tackle. I want you to be specific, please.
That's right. That's not going to happen. I will have to go back and rewatch the podcast and get back to you on that one.
You could watch it 5 times and you couldn't answer that question.
A lot of stuff. I mean, I said it before about fishing college, but that was like a perfect example of what if there was such a thing as fishing college. I mean, that was it.
Ooh, you just gave me an idea.
Oh, there you go.
I need another project.
You do. You need more.
There's this time I'm sleeping where I could be more productive.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
All right, David's best takeaway.
Okay, so he talked about a lot, but I'm going to go with the basics. If you're fishing for the bluefin, go with the naked ballyhoo with that specialized egg weight.
Yeah, man, I like that detail too. The drill press, just so it'll slide over top of the crimp, man. I mean, that's smart. I love those details, man. And when fishing, it seems more so on sport fishers, with a good mate, good captain, man, their attention to those details is just impressive. I've described it as a mix between artistic and scientific, and it's wonderful.
No, exactly. Well, let's wrap it up and thank our sponsors. We've got the Port City Science and Graphics, yourboatmoney.com, and Marine Warehouse Center. If you would like to sponsor the podcast, just contact the Fisherman's Post office and we will hook you up.
And remember, premium content membership makes a great holiday gift. You get early access to the podcast, you get bonus podcast content, and you get our weekly video, audio delivery fishing reports up and down the entire North Carolina coast.